Morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
I'd like to open this hearing by acknowledging that the city of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that the land on which Hamilton sits is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Many of the council appearing on the hearing today are in Toronto, which is on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to have an opportunity to work on this land. Commissioner, we have the continued examination of Mr. McGuire, and he has previously been sworn. May I proceed?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, you said last time yesterday on Friday that you had not attended the January 23 closed session of council. Is that right?
Oh, that's correct.
The inquirers received documents that between January 30 and February 1, Mr. Malone attended at least 2 meetings with city staff and Mr. Bogosian. Do you recall being prepped about what had happened in the January 23 in a closed session meeting before those meetings with Mr. Malone?
I don't have a direct recollection.
You don't have a recollection either way?
No, I do not.
Okay. Notes of others that the inquiry has received suggested that you attended at least 2 calls with Mr. Malone. Do you recall that?
I do recall it. Yeah, some phone calls.
And do you recall there was a number of individuals on some of the calls with Mr. Malone, Mr. Bogosian, communication staff, and you were on those calls. Do you remember those sort of large group calls?
Yeah, pardon me. I do recall that we had a few larger calls. Yes.
Okay. And do you also recall speaking with Mr. Malone, either alone or just with Mr. Soldo?
I don't have a recollection of that.
Okay. So the documents that the inquiries received suggest that the first of these large group calls was on January 30th and that you were an attendee on that call. Was this the first time that you spoke with or were involved with discussions with Mr. Malone about the Tradewind report?
Yeah, I can't recall if that was the first conversation or not. And but this was obviously a more in-depth one.
Okay. Well, this is important evidence. Do you recall speaking to Mr. Malone before having a group call? And I'm not suggesting like on that day, but just generally before January 30th.
I don't recall, and I don't recall either way.
So sitting here today, you can't say whether you spoke to Mr. Malone about the Tradewind report before January 30th?
No, I don't have a recollection of that.
Do you have any specific recollection of speaking to Mr. Malone about the Tradewind report before January 30th?
So, I mean, we were having conversations with, SEMA regarding the illumination. We were having conversations with other consultants. I don't have a direct recollection of what conversation took place with which consultant at which time.
Did you give any instruction to SEMA in respect of the Tradewind report before January 30th?
I believe I did.
Okay, we have nothing to suggest that you did, no emails to suggest that you did. But if your evidence is you can't recall either way and you don't have confidence about whether you spoke to him, I do feel like I need to keep asking questions about it. What would you have been speaking to him about in respect of the Tradewind report?
And I don't have a recollection of speaking to Brian, so that's what I'm going to give you for information.
Okay, having prepared for today, did you search back in your memory and try to set out the narrative to see if you'd had a conversation with him? And sitting here today, you can't recall either way?
No, I can't.
Okay. To your knowledge, was Mr. Malone aware of the Tradewin report before the group call with Mr. Bogosian and other city staff on January 30th?
Sorry, you're asking if I knew if Brian had the Tradewin report?
Or was aware of it?
I understand he was.
And what's the basis for that understanding?
Sorry, I'm losing track. The January 30th call was to introduce Brian to the Tradewin report, or he already had it? And apologies, there was a lot going on at that time.
Sure. So that's exactly my question. This is a large group call with Mr. Bogosian, Mr. Malone, a number of city staff, including you. And I could take you to some notes to try to refresh your memory about the subject matter of that call. But and I'll paraphrase here, it was Mr. Bogosian and Mr. Malone both have notes of this, and it was about whether the road should be closed, about sort of interim safety measures. And so my question to you is, to your knowledge, before this call, was Mr. Malone aware of the existence of the Tradewin report?
And I don't have direct knowledge of having a conversation with Brian in advance of that or not.
Okay. And you don't have any knowledge either way about whether he knew about the existence of the Tradewin report before this call?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Did you understand that this call was flowing from requests from counselors at the January 23rd meeting?
I don't have a recollection of what the, again, I don't think I was fully aware of what took place in the January 23rd meeting. I think I had some background into it, and then this call, and again, I don't recall the call in great detail either.
Okay, so I think I'm taking from your evidence that you don't think that you were debriefed before the January 30th call about what happened at January 23, and this was your introduction to it as well?
I think that's reasonable. I probably had a hallway conversation or something about what might have taken place, but I don't recall.
What did you anticipate SEMA's work product would ultimately be coming out of the January 30th call and this sort of series of discussions with Mr. Malone at the end of January?
My understanding was that in order for us to prepare for the February 6th meeting, there was a letter that Brian was going to provide, and it would outline, his views, or SEMA's views of some of the potential concerns or things that may come up during the meeting.
Registrar, excuse me, Registrar, could you bring up OD 9A, page 362 to 363, please? So, Mr. McGuire, I'm bringing up 362 because it's the beginning of Mr. Bogosian's notes. You'll see it 585. There's just a reference to what follows. And then 363 is the transcription of his notes. Registrar, could you now bring up 363 and 364, please? Thank you. And can you call it 363? See right at the bottom, it says BM closed the RHVE, ? Not necessary. Do you recall discussions during this group call about whether Mr. Malone had a view about whether it was necessary to close the Red Hill?
No, I don't recall.
By January 30th, had you discussed with city staff the need to consider taking interim safety measures on the Red Hill in advance of repaving?
There were ongoing conversations around measures that had been, previously suggested and introduced, but I'm not sure what you're asking from interim safety measures.
Had you considered the need about whether there was interim safety measures that needed to be put in place in between January 30th and the repaving?
The interim safety measures were being addressed through operations and through SEMA, and we were again proceeding to make sure that the resurfacing project was ready for tender.
Okay, so apart from measures that SEMA had recommended or was going to recommend in the roadside safety assessment, was there any other discussion about other interim safety measures that should be considered with you?
At this meeting, or just in general?
In general, before January 30th.
Have I received Golder's second follow-up yet, or I'm not sure the timing on that?
You're in the midst of trying to negotiate the final 2017 Golder pavement evaluation, which comes on March 1st.
Okay. So those would have been the conversations that I would have been having at that time.
Okay, so you didn't have any other conversations with staff about whether there were other interim safety measures that should be considered?
Not at this point, not from my perspective, no.
Okay. Registrar, could you close this down and go to page 376 of OD9A, please? And if you could call out 870. So this is a summary from Mr. Malone to some of his colleagues about a discussion that he had first with Mr. Soldo and then with a group call that took place between 4:30 and after 6. You see in the first paragraph, and then follow-on calls from Edward S. and Gord M. directly. And you'll see that he then says that in the third paragraph that data will be sent to me. He's referencing studies held in confidence until now. And that data will be sent to me, and the city will be asking for the content of those if the content of those changes any of our recommendations in our studies. Up to this point, did you have any that is having attended this group call? Did you have any views about whether there were any steps the city needed to take immediately, that is before repaving?
I hadn't had a report from, I mean, if we went back to Tradewind, it had identified, to do further studies and the potential remedial action. And then I was working with Golders, who had identified, a series of tests that we were trying to resolve with respect to what the considerations were under the different testing. But at that point, most of the roadside safety and other components were with the transportation operations and the engineering group with Edward Soldo.
You said, well, if we went back to Tradewind, you mean if you went back and looked at the report, right? Not that you went back to Tradewind.
Oh, correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So here there's this reference to follow-on calls with Edward S. and Gord M. Do you recall speaking with Mr. Malone, either with Mr. Soldo or alone, just you and Mr. Malone?
No, I don't.
What was your understanding by January 30th of Mr. Malone's expertise in friction?
His direct expertise or SEMA?
His direct expertise.
My understanding of Brian's background was he's a transportation engineer, and would have, without going into sort of credentials, would have an understanding of the operations of of all the roads and facilities, and as a function of that, an understanding of friction.
Registrar, could you close this and call out page 368, paragraph 860, please? Thank you. On that same day, Ms. Audie asked you if a draft 2017 Golder pavement evaluation report, if this was the report, the 2017 friction testing, to go to SEMA. SEMA had not received a copy of the draft 2017 Golder pavement evaluation before January 30th.
And not to my knowledge.
So you hadn't sent it. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct. I don't think we've gotten to a final version at this point.
That's right. Had you had discussions with Mr. Malone about the contents of the draft 2017 Golder pavement evaluation report before January 30th?
I don't recall.
You don't recall either way?
Yeah, I don't recall either way.
If you hadn't, why not?
I'm still working through the deliverables with Golders. I think I'm not sure where we are here, but it wasn't in a complete form yet.
But Ms. Audie, am I reading from this that it was her recommendation that SEMA be provided with the then current draft of the pavement evaluation report?
Yeah, I'm not sure what she's asking here. Got a quote that says the friction testing to go to SEMA. I don't know the context of the rest of that email.
Registrar, could you close this call out? Registrar, can you go to 380 and 381, please? You're not copied on this email. That's the entirety of 381. It's from a SEMA colleague, Jeff Petzold, to Mr. Malone. And it is quite long. If you could pull out the second half of that page, Registrar. So Mr. Petzold is providing some sort of background information about friction testing to Mr. Malone. And he says in the fourth paragraph from the bottom, the question is whether the road should be closed. The question around whether the road should be closed might be a bit overkill. But I'd say that rehabilitation needs to be expedited. Can't do much in the winter other than sand salt. But if they could do an interim chip seal or something, maybe even mill the pavement so it has texture to it. Did anyone convey this commentary from Mr. Petzold to you?
I don't recall that.
Had you considered whether to do some interim chip seal or mill the pavement so it had some texture?
Again, with the information that's in front of us and what we end up, seeing or understanding, I don't have a report in front of me telling me to do this immediately or in specific locations. So people it appears here that someone's suggesting something with a question mark on it. So I'm not sure if that's, does that mean maybe not, or I can't read into that, what he's suggesting.
So my question was, had you considered whether to do some interim chip seal or mill pavement so it had some texture? Is your answer no?
I don't believe we had considered it in a kind of a formal perspective.
You had considered it in some informal way?
Sure. I mean, we're hearing a lot about friction and values and things like that, trying to understand what else is going on. But lots of sort of hallway conversations or trying to figure out what's happening. But at this point, no, I don't think we've got a formal proposal. And in order for us to do something like this, we would, have to develop a specification and put it into a tender and put it out. So I don't believe that we have something like this on the shelf that we can pull off and push out. So that would require some work as well. That's what I think the state of our understanding at that time.
Registrar, can you pull out CIM 22419, please? And can you bring up the next image as well? You'll see on the left-hand side, this is from February 1st, 10:30, call with Soldo and McGuire. Do you recall speaking to Mr. Malone? These are Mr. Malone's notes at 10:30 on February 1st. I can tell you, just to orient you, then there's a conversation, a broader group conversation thereafter, including Mr. Bogosian.
No, I don't.
Registrar, can you go back to OD9A, page 419, please? Apologies, I realize CIM 22419 has not been marked as an exhibit, and I'd ask that it be marked as the next exhibit, which I think is 199.
Alright, Council, thank you.
So there's some back and forth on February 4th. Mr. Malone provides Mr. Bogosian with a what we call the February 4th memo. He provides him with a draft, and you receive a copy of that February 4th memo at some point. Registrar, could you go to the next page, please? Actually, it's the following page. It's 421. And it's at the very top. There's a reference to Ms. Audie sending you and Mr. McKinnon and Mr. Soldo the February 4th memo. Did you provide any comments on the memo?
I don't believe I did.
Did you understand that it would be submitted via legal counsel, or was this February 4th memo, something that was your responsibility to determine how and whether it should be provided to council?
I don't know who was supposed to supply it, but I didn't have the understanding that I was supplying it.
Okay. Part of the memo asks whether the road should be closed. I'm not going to go into it just in the interest of time, but that general question of whether the road should be closed. Had you sought any assessment from any consultant prior to the February 4th memo about whether the road should be closed?
Not to my knowledge.
Registrar, can you go to page 446 and 447, please? You'll see at the bottom of 446 and into 447, Ms. Graham is starts to prepare, or she finalizes her preparation of a slide deck that's going to be used as part of the presentation for the report to GIC on the 6th. Did you have any involvement in preparing the slides or the timeline that Ms. Graham is working on?
Sorry, I believe that Jasmine had asked about some of the preliminary timeline, and I'm not sure if this was maybe an extract from some of the sort of chronologies we had developed, but I don't recall working on the actual presentation.
Thank you, Registrar. Can you go to the next page, please, 448? At 1054, which is the top half of this page, Mr. Soldo wrote to you and Mr. McKinnon. I will say it again. Has anyone checked his emails for this sort of material? And this is in respect of Mr. Moore's emails, and it's following from your receipt, Mr. White forwarding some emails in respect of the 2015 SEMA report. Prior to February 5, had you instructed anyone to secure Mr. Moore's emails or the information he had uploaded to ProjectWise?
I don't have the ability to instruct anyone to deal with his inbox. That would be with IT. And with respect to the stuff in ProjectWise, we had worked with, at this point, I think, with audit as well as anyone else or on this file, but to ensure that that information, that we had it, that nothing had happened to it.
With you think audit was ensuring that the ProjectWise documents were secure?
I believe at some point audit sent a note making sure that we had backed everything up and we had confirmed that we had, and that was sort of standard practice anyways.
Registrar, could you go to page 408, please? And can you call out 934, please? On February 1, Mr. Soldo contacted Kevin Bentley at the MTO and asked if he had a person the city can contact regarding pavement friction testing and anticipated values for SMA pavements. Did you have any discussions with Mr. Soldo before he reached out to Mr. Bentley?
Not to my recollection.
Registrar, could you close this and go to page 425, please? And if you can call out 989. Mr. Malone contacted one of his colleagues on February 4, and he said, Gord McGuire in Hamilton is asking if we have any contacts at the MTO regarding pavements, and referenced Becca Lane. Why did you want to contact MTO at this time?
I don't have a sort of direct recollection of why we're looking to talk to MTO. I do know that they have I guess it's what I would consider to be the bituminous section, or, they have more background into sort of the testing and materials management. So I think we were looking for some insight into, just a little bit more background into some of the information that might have been coming up around SMAs. But that's my recollection at this point.
Okay, so you think it was trying to get a better understanding of SMA pavement, not about friction?
Probably. I mean, obviously, the questions with the SMA would then go to the discussion around its. And I'm not sure when we became aware of their paper regarding early age or their treatments.
That was in September of 2018.
Okay, fair.
Had you contacted MTO prior to February 4, 2019?
Not to my knowledge.
And you hadn't instructed any of your staff to do so?
I don't believe I directly instructed any of them. I do know there were some conversations back and forth between a variety of folks in what I call the industry, but I'm not sure what their specific topics were.
Okay, and you don't know whether that actually happened or not.
That's correct.
You certainly didn't direct anyone and expect a response and then not get a response from your staff. That didn't happen.
That's correct.
Registrar, can you go to 10A, page 19, please? You took notes of the GIC meeting that was on February 6th. I'm going to assume from that you attended it.
Correct.
What was your role in the closed session portion of the meeting?
Fairly limited. I don't believe, I mean, I was there as potentially if anyone had a question, but I wasn't leading any of the discussion.
And what about in the public session? Did you lead any discussion there?
No, I don't believe I did.
You didn't present PW 18008A?
I can't recall. I know that was on the agenda, and I'm not sure if Dan took that one through, or if if there was questions, we would have been right there with him if in the event that there was a question about specific on the report.
It's sitting here today. You can't recall if you actually had a speaking role?
Yeah, I don't recall presenting, and I'm not sure if I responded to any comments, but no, I don't recall having a speaking role.
And what about the lighting study? Were you presenting on that? Do you remember having a speaking role on that part?
I don't believe we presented the lighting study formally. I mean, it was a together with PW 18008A, but I'm not sure if anyone had any questions on it.
Okay. Registrar, can you bring up HAM 29133, please? Can you call it the next image as well? So this is the final version of PW 18008A. And we spoke on Friday about that I think your evidence was Mr. Soldo did the drafting on some aspects and you added some paragraphs. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Registrar, can you go to image 3 and 4, please? So the way that it is organized is in respect, I think, both of themes, but also of the OBL items or the motions that are before PWC. And you'll see at the bottom of 3 and into 4 is the reference to street lighting. Did you prepare this part of PW 18008A?
Yeah, that I would have authored this section.
You said earlier, and just a few moments ago, that council didn't have any questions about this. Did council have any response at all to that SEMA had found that there was no documentation that previously completed studies had a specific prohibition on that would preclude lighting?
I recall that there was some questions around the cost, which was section D. I don't recall specifically around what you're asking about point B.
Yeah, no, I'm asking if council said, that's different than what we had previously been led to understand. No questions like that?
I don't believe in open session. I don't think I made any notes to that effect.
Okay. At the bottom of image 4 is reference to friction testing. It goes on to the next page. Registrar, could you pull out those 2 paragraphs at the bottom of image 4, please? So it says, as identified in report PW 18008, Appendix A. So this is one of these appendices that has the countermeasures. Friction testing on the parkways was completed. Engineering Services retained a consultant in November of 2017 to review 3 elements of the RHVP materials. So just so the evidence is really clear, in terms of Appendix A, what friction testing did you understand had been completed?
So my understanding was that there was the sort of the 3 components as identified in the Golder's proposal of November 2017, being the British pendulum test, the macro texture or measured texture depth, and then the polished stone values.
And you were aware that the drafters of PW 18008 didn't know about those, the Golder pavement evaluation when they marked friction testing as complete, right?
I believe that email from Martin was, I can't remember, was it like February 5th or something, or close in time?
The email where he says, he knew about Mr. Moore completing friction testing?
Correct.
And the one that references the UK standard? Sure, I think it's an English test.
Yes.
I'm sorry. So can you just answer my question, which was, you were aware that the drafters of that report didn't know about the pavement, Golder pavement evaluation when they marked friction testing as complete?
I believe I did. Yes.
You believe you're aware that they didn't know?
Correct.
Okay. Registrar, you can close this down. Following the GIC meeting on February 6th, what were the next steps on your plate regarding the trade wind report and the Red Hill more generally?
So the main focus was the resurfacing project. There was some conversations around that, I believe, and moving it forward. The trade wind report, to my knowledge, was being managed through legal and SEMA as they continue to move forward with that.
Registrar, can you go to ODA, pardon me, 10A, page 99 and 100, please? We looked a moment ago at the February 1st email that Mr. Soldo sent to Mr. Bentley. That's at the bottom of 99. And then in the OD, there's a further reference to interactions with MTO. Registrar, can you pull out to 45, please? So Mr. Soldo followed up on February 4. Registrar, you can close that down. And then there are internally at MTO some back and forth on February 12. Registrar, could you go to the next page, please? Could you bring up 101 and 102? And can you call out 247 to 249, please? On February 12, Mr. Van Donegan from the Hamilton Spectator emailed Ms. Graham and Mr. McKinnon enclosing friction test results from 2007 to 2014, and that gets forwarded to you. You'll see it 248. Prior to this date, which was February 12th, were you aware that MTO had completed friction testing between 2008 and 2014?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
By this point, had you had any discussions with Mr. Bentley or Ms. Lane or anybody else at MTO?
I recall having a conversation with both of them, but I don't recall the actual dates.
Okay.
So-
Do you remember anything about the discussions with either of them?
At this moment in time, no, I don't recall. I know further on, I have a conversation with Ms. Lane, but I'm not sure. I don't think it was at this point. This is February. I think this is later on.
Okay.
I think I have that conversation.
We do have a couple of references to discussions. I'll take you to them to help to try to refresh your memory. Registrar, could you close the call out and go to 111 and 112, please? And you'll see at the bottom of 111 at 278, February 26th, you emailed Mr. Bentley about MTO friction testing data. And you said, are there maps to identify the limits of this testing? I'm looking for an overlay. Registrar, you don't need to call that out. At 279, Ms. Lane replied, you could look at tab 2, it's test data. And then you say on March 1, can I call you on this matter for a bit of clarity? And then there's a discussion that's arranged for 3:15, review friction testing processes results. Was that the discussion that you're thinking of it with Ms. Lane?
I would have to say yes. I can't recall how many conversations we had, but yeah.
Do you remember whether you had one or more than one conversation with her?
No, I don't.
And do you recall, did you actually speak directly to Mr. Bentley?
I was on a call with, I believe it was Mr. Soldo and Mr. Bentley, but I'm not sure if other MTO staff were on or not.
Okay. Registrar, could you go back one page to 110? And can you call out, actually, I'll just, can you call it 274, please? So there's some back and forth amongst counselors and Mr. McKinnon about how to sort of characterize the MTO friction data and the friction values in particular. And Mr. McKinnon sends some language to you. At the bottom, it says, generally speaking, the tests observed by MTO are consistent with the results observed through the 2013 Tradewind tests. You can close that down, Registrar. Mr. McKinnon asks about that to you. Registrar, can you bring up 276 and 277? Says, do you two agree with my last statement that MTO results are generally agree with Tradewind? And you said, correct, the Tradewind results are quite close to MTO results. And Mr. Solder says, I would concur. What was the basis for your view that the Tradewind results are quite close to the MTO results?
I believe it was just a straight numeric review of whatever again, I think the numbers were in the 30s or 40s or something along those lines, and it seemed to be reasonably close or something along, within those limits.
Okay. And had you had any discussions with anyone, Golder, MTO, anybody else, SEMA, about how to compare the MTO results to the Tradewind results, and whether they were comparable?
So I think I'm learning either very shortly or potentially getting to get some understanding that correlating grip test and skid number and British pendulum are difficult. And I'm not sure when exactly I find that out.
From whom did you find that out?
I believe that came through from the Golder's assignment.
Okay. Registrar, could you close this down and go to page 113 and 114, please? And can you pull out 283? Mr. Soldo emailed Ms. Audie, Mr. McKinnon, and you about friction numbers. And he said, I thought I would like to contact SEMA regarding the new friction data we have from MTO in order for them to review it in the same context and extrapolate a degradation curve based on the data. Did you have discussions with Mr. Soldo about trying to extrapolate some sort of degrading curve?
And I don't recall them directly, but I know once February 14th, when did we become aware of the MTO data? Around what, February 12th or something?
Yeah, a couple days before.
Yeah, I think this was a sort of a contextual conversation and trying to understand what what the friction values may or may not be currently, because again, I think the friction sampling from MTO, and it concluded around 20, I think you said 14, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
2008 to 2014 was the new friction data from MTO.
Yeah.
Why didn't you just do a new friction test on the road?
So it's February. I'm not certain that we would get, because you have to apply and understand at this point, depending on which testing methodology you're using, you have to apply a wet film. I'm not sure if that would work in the winter in Canada. And at this point in time, I'm not sure. We've got a British pendulum value that we're sort of trying to work through, and so I think mostly winter related, but we're still trying to understand what kind of testing we would do.
Registrar, can you go to HAM 49139, please? Can you bring up the next image as well? Thank you. On March 1, you contact Aisha Gazelle from the city of Hamilton, and it looks like they're, on February 25, and she responds on March 1, looking for information on pavement friction testing. What information were you looking for from this other municipality?
So if we go through this email, and I don't recall this in infinite detail, but I was having a conversation with a counterpart in Ottawa, and that's regarding kind of a different program. Asked her if she had any inside information that they may be able to provide. We have a lot of conversations with other cities about what it is or isn't that they do. And that was, I guess she forwarded on, and this is the response we got.
Thank you, Registrar. Can you mark this as the next exhibit? Did you have any other discussions with Ottawa apart from this email?
Not to my knowledge.
Registrar? So I'll just wait for confirmation that this is marked as the next exhibit.
Yes, Council, it's Exhibit 200.
Thank you. Registrar, can you go back into OD 10A, page 157 and 158, please? So you are involved in the resurfacing. Am I right that Ms. Jacob has and Mr. Beck have sort of project management carriage of the resurfacing, and you have oversight?
Correct.
So on March 5, Mr. Norris, who I believe is at AME, who's been retained to assist with the resurfacing, is that right?
Correct.
So he emailed Mr. Beck with a revised letter on the selection of the pavement mix on the Red Hill. And you'll see, just following this email chain from the bottom of 57 into 58, there's a suggestion for SMA and FC2. And Ms. Jacob forwards this letter to you, and she says AME has recommended SMA and as an alternative recommended FC2. And you respond, AME notes a lower initial cost with the SP mix. Given the challenges we've had with SMA on the RHVP, I can't consider going back to that mix. And in the end, the mix that was used for the resurfacing was FSC. Is that right?
So the mix that we ended up using was a super pave, not a stone mastic asphalt, if that's what you're asking.
That is what I'm asking, yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Why did you decide that you couldn't consider going back to SMA?
So the SMAs, I mean, obviously, there's been ongoing conversations about the characteristics, the performance characteristics of them in particular, around the friction. The other, main challenge I have here is that Golders has ruled it out for a hot in place. And if I recall correctly, I believe MTO brought the SMA back on as a mix, but in order to place it, they put a grit or something like that on it early. That didn't appear to be something that I wanted to bring up in order to increase the friction right out of the gate with a project on the Red Hill.
Registrar, can you bring up RHV 890, please? On March 22, Audit Services received a copy of an anonymous letter regarding the RHVP and Public Works generally. Before preparing for the inquiry, had you seen or read this letter?
Yes, I have. I have seen it and read it.
Before preparing for the inquiry?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. How did you become aware of this letter?
I recall that Mr. McKinnon had a copy of it and shared it with me. I don't know the date that it arrived, but yeah, it was shared with me. I believe when it first arrived.
Did you write this letter?
I did not.
Do you know who did?
I do not.
Did you take any steps to have any of the assertions set out in it investigated within Public Works?
I'm not sure what assertions were made in it.
Okay. Did you take any steps to have any investigation arising from it commenced?
Without reading it again in detail, we were underway with a number of things, so I'm not sure what specifically you're asking me, but I didn't take this letter and turn it into an internal review of something or another.
I meant sort of a conduct, an investigation into the conduct of employees.
Well, I mean, considering that it's anonymous, I'm not sure what weight to put on it, and it appears to be some opinions of what happened. And no, I did not start a sort of an investigation into staff as a result of this letter.
Thank you. Registrar, can you bring up HAM 62826? No, sorry, let me try that again. HAM 62862. This is a Public Works project management manual. Registrar, could you go to image 2 and 3? So this is about project management and how to develop a charter and the phases and transitions. Were you involved in the preparation of this document?
I believe I was.
What was its purpose?
Is this within engineering services, or is this a Public Works?
This is I don't mean to interrupt. I believe this is a Public Works document.
Okay. So my division had a focus on project management, and I believe we were folding into this one a larger overall sort of project scope and definitions, roles and responsibilities, stakeholder engagement across the entire department as well.
Thank you. Registrar, could you mark this as the next exhibit?
Noted, Council. It's Exhibit 201.
Thank you. Commissioner, I see I took longer than my anticipated time. I can advise those are my questions from Mr. McGuire.
Okay,
I understand that all participants may have questions for him,
okay.
although I've not discussed that with them today.
Well, why don't we begin with Ms. Roberts and Golder?
Thank you. Commissioner, may I begin then?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, hello, I'm Jennifer Roberts, counsel for Golder. I have a number of questions and I'm going to jump around a bit. So if you need me to reframe a question and put a document to you, please let me know so that we're both on the same page. I want to begin with the interaction that you had on August 30th with Mr. Malone when you sent him an email that you found on Project Wise, which was Dr. Uzrowski's email of January 24, 2014. Registrar, I wonder if you could please put up OD9A image 61. Thank you. Okay. So the bottom of that page, you forward an email, and Registrar, if you could please go to the next image. Thank you. And there's a summary of the email that you forwarded. The email says, if you look at just below the first box, it says in 2013, the friction numbers were measured on the RHVP in both directions by Tradewind Scientific using a grip tester. The average FN numbers were as follows. And your evidence, as I recall it, is that you read it quickly and you focused on the aspect of this that was referential to 2007 after the Red Hill had just opened. Do I have that right?
That's my recollection.
Okay. And are you saying that you didn't take in and read the fact that a consultant had been identified here who conducted friction testing in 2013?
That would be my
Okay.
summary of what I apparently read and forwarded to Brian.
Okay, and the overview document extract doesn't have it, but the bottom of that email actually has a signing line, an address for Dr. Uzrowski at Golder. And I take it you didn't note that either.
Correct.
All right. Now the evidence is that Mr. Malone replies to your August 30th email on about September 4. Registrar, that's overview document 9A, pages 72, 73. Can you please move forward? And I think your evidence is that this exchange is probably the first significant review of friction that you've been getting. Do I have that right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, and so you noted in your testimony that Mr. Malone stated that what was missing was an identification of a threshold or relative comparison, and that's what he says in his reply. Do you have that?
Do I have that in what?
Sorry.
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Forgive me, it was not a very well framed question. Do you recall understanding that from Mr. Malone?
So I think if I back it up, you're asking if I read this and understood that Brian had the data, but no framework.
That's what he's saying in it. So if you look, let's just pull it out. On page 73, at Registrar, if you can please call out that second paragraph, what was missing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what it says. So you recall reading that and you understood that Mr. Malone was telling you that from his read, that what was missing was an identification of a threshold or relative comparison. Do I have that right?
Correct.
Okay. And when received this email back from Mr. Malone and you understood that there was uncertainty about the threshold and what the data meant, why didn't you direct Mr. Malone to go back to Tradewin, go back to the consultant who did these numbers?
So at that point in time, I have a 4-year-old report that Mr. Malone's indicated that he's had this information before. I'm still not sure about connecting which reading with which expected value, and no, I did not direct or ask Mr. Malone to reach out to Golden.
Thank you, Registrar. You can take down that call out. I want to go forward in time. Registrar, can we please go to page 90, image 90? So I want to go back to the point in which you locate or have the Golder report. I think, let me just try and summarize my understanding of your evidence. You said in testimony that you located the Tradewin report, and we've got that, located temporally about September 26th. You didn't have a recollection of finding the Golder report. And I think as you explained it, you thought that Ms. Cameron found it in hard copy and then shared it with you. Do I have that understanding correctly?
Yeah, I believe I also noted that it may have come from either Mike Beck or Susan Jacob. I don't have a direct recollection of how the package of the sort of year 6 performance together with Tradewin all came together.
Okay, thank you. In any event, it was located because Susan Jacob had it on September 27, and she sent it to you along with her cover summary. That's correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And at some point you read it. That's correct?
Read what?
The Golder report.
It's a significant report. I think it's 100 pages or something. So I believe that I've gone through. I wouldn't have read it in its entirety, no.
Sorry, but you would have read the actual report section, which is quite short.
I believe I would have reviewed it. I'm not sure if I read it in detail.
Well, and by September 3, you're summarizing it pretty accurately. So I'm going to make these. I think
By September the 3rd,
right,
or
by December 3rd, you certainly
Okay.
are summarizing it accurately. So I put it to you, sir, that at some time you read it and with more than cursory detail.
correct. And at some, but I think I'm trying to understand. You're asking me about September 27th and whether I've read it. And I don't believe I've read it in detail on September 27th.
That's fair. You were asked in questioning by Commission Counsel whether you recalled a discussion with Mr. Moore about why the Golder report was identified as being draft. Do you remember that? She asked you that question. You remember?
Sorry, you're asking what my understanding is of why the report was left in draft?
No, I'm asking you a question. Sorry, I'm putting to you, just to frame this in reference to your prior testimony, that Commission Counsel asked you whether you recalled discussing with Mr. Gary Moore about why the Golder report was in draft. Do you remember that question being asked of you?
So I
I think it was Thursday.
Yeah, fair. I recall over the last 3 days, a lot of questions being asked of me. So I don't recall each question exactly.
No. that's fine. And if I can just take you said at the time that you didn't recall whether you'd had a discussion with Mr. Moore about why the report is draft. Does that help you? Is that an accurate summary of the evidence you gave?
So I mean, considering I'm having a challenge recalling a lot of the stuff that came through, if you're telling me that's what I said 2 days ago, then I'll agree with you. And I don't recall understanding why the report was left in draft, if that's the sort of the high level question that you're asking me.
Okay, well, it was about a conversation with Mr. Moore, but I'll move over. So, but once you had the Golder report and you saw that it was in draft, you didn't contact Golder, did you?
I did not know.
And you didn't ask Golder, you didn't ask Dr. Uzarowski why the report was marked draft and not signed, did you?
I did not know.
And you didn't ask Dr. Uzarowski or anyone at Golder to finalize the report, did you?
The 2014 report?
Correct.
I'm not certain if staff had that communication with him, but I don't recall that. No, I don't recall having that conversation.
Well, let me just ask that. Do you have any evidence that you can put forward today that someone from Hamilton contacted Dr. Uzarowski and asked that he deliver a finalized version of the Golder report with his signature on it? Do you have?
I don't recall. No, I don't recall that.
So thank you. You can take out that call out register. I just want to go to it briefly. Registrar, can you please go to, going to go back in time here, go to overview document 6, page 97, to paragraph 253. I just want to take you so briefly to the Golder report, which is summarized. There we go. Thank you. So this is an extract from the analysis and recommendations, section 6. So this is part of the report, and the report identifies and repeats here the finding of longitudinal top-down cracking and makes a series of recommendations for the remedial work needed for which Dr. Uzarowski is recommending, including that sections be mill and paved and a new surface earth mix be placed. Do you see that?
Yeah, it's in these 2 paragraphs, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And then milling and paving those sections. And if you look at the second paragraph, you've got Dr. Uzarowski's recommendation that the existing cracks on the surface should be routed and sealed. And that following the routing and sealing, it's recommended that a single layer of microsurfacing be applied. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And you recall reading those recommendations?
Not directly, but I believe Susan summarized a bunch of this, and that became a part of that overview document or whatever. That's probably the wrong phrase for that sort of review document that I had.
I think actually you summarized it more accurately on in your telephone conversation on December 3, but okay.
Well, I mean, so maybe let's go through this. In the first paragraph in 2014, second sentence starting with based on, he notes that there may be a mill and overlay required for around 2.5 kilometers.
Yeah.
But at this point in 2018, that's changed to a full resurfacing, and I'm not sure if it's 2.5 lane kilometers or 2.5 total kilometers of work. So fair enough. I mean, it looks like things have changed a bit in the last 4 years.
Well, I think we're talking, there's a different thing, so let's just stay here. I'm just trying to look at these recommendations that were made to the city of Hamilton in 2014, sir. Okay, and in your
Sorry, I mean, the recommendation was to mill and overlay about 2.5K, right?
yes,
I
and
can't remember the, sorry, again, I think the total length in lane kilometers is, and I've lost track and I should know this, but it's like 25K or something.
right, so it's about 7.5 or something for the whole Red Hill.
Fair.
That's right. Okay. And just to go to it, on the second, it says after the routing and sealing that you've got the recommendation to use the microsurfacing. You saw that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, you were asked in your testimony by Commission Counsel whether you had a concern. And she asked you about the Tradewin report. And she said, did you have a concern that the Tradewin report said to do more testing and that there had not been more testing between 2014 and 2017? And you said you didn't have concern about that. Do you remember that testimony?
Not directly, but I believe we've had that conversation.
Okay, so my question to you is, but here you have the opinion of a pavement consultant that the pavement on an important asset for the city of Hamilton has deteriorated and required remediation. Does it concern you that that there are recommendations to implement remedial work and that's not implemented?
So I'm unaware of what's taken place. I think in that 4-year window, I would rely on staff, and that would be Susan and Mike Beck and the folks in asset management who have that sort of that more in-depth materials background to identify what's coming out of these reports that needs to be that would need to be programmed and addressed.
Okay. So you're relying on other people as to whether something needs to be implemented, but my question was slightly different. Let's go forward in the evidence. So in December 3, you have there's audio from a value for money audit meeting you have with Ms. McNeil. Registrar, let's go forward in the chronology. Can we please to OD9A, beginning page, image 182? Yes, so the bottom of the page at paragraph 428, it references the recording. Thank you. And then Registrar, we can go to the next page, please. So this begins at 183, begin the extract of the recording. Do you remember going to this in your testimony?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. So can we please turn up image 184? Thank you. Okay, so I'd asked you whether it concerned you whether none of the recommendations had been implemented on the Red Hill between 2014 and 2017, and you said you'd rely on other people. But I suggest to you, sir, that by the time you're having this conversation with Ms. McNeil, that you know that none of those recommendations have been implemented. That's correct?
It said provide further follow-up, and I do know that we have additional work taking place with Golders around both the study for the hot in place, and then this is December, so I was aware of it in sort of early November, I believe.
You're not.
And I'm also aware that you've got an assignment for some of the other aspects.
So that's got that. Those are different questions or different answers to a different question, sir. Let me just stick with the question I've asked you, which is by December 3, you know that none of the recommendations for remedial work on the Red Hill had been carried out. That's true.
And so which recommendations are those? The microservicing?
Yeah, the microsurfacing, the mill and the route and seal, and the mill and overlay. Those are the three ones.
So I'm not aware that the route and seal hasn't taken place. And yeah, I think I am aware that that there hasn't been milling or microservicing at this point. Yes, correct.
Thank you. And let me go back to my question. Does it concern you that you have recommendations for remedial work on an important asset that just have not been implemented for 3 years?
So do those recommendations have a time frame on them? Did they say they need to be done immediately, or were they time bound, or was I'm trying to cast my mind back to that. Did
No,
they?
But
No.
it's your asset, sir. I'm sorry, your asset. It's City of Hamilton's asset. Are you saying you don't have to take recommendations unless there's a timeline on it? Surely you're not suggesting that.
In general, I would expect a consultant to identify if there was an immediate need, a medium-term need, or a long-term need, and then that would get programmed into your capital program or your operating programs.
Okay. So absent a specific temporal recommendation, you're saying that the City of Hamilton doesn't need to concern itself with when recommendations get implemented. Is that what you're saying?
I would never say that. That's not no. But in general, we would expect to see, kind of a let's get on this immediately. Let's consider this in the medium term. Let's push this to a longer term program.
Okay, let's just go to some of these statements that are made here. So this extract is ascribed to you, sir. You can, Registrar, can you please call out that second paragraph beginning strange offering we have here? A strange offering that happened here is that we've known about this friction issue for a while. Our consultants recommended whether or not to microsurface this thing, basically to put a tack coat on and up the friction. And then you go on, you talk about the programming and you say, we hadn't had the Red Hill program for resurfacing and through any of that cycle. And normally we program work like that. It's like 10 years ago. So we would say, and you go into the details of the capital budget. And then you note that in year 10 in 2017, you've got 15 million bucks that are dumped onto the Red Hill unbeknownst to anyone. Do you see all of that?
I do.
Yeah. Okay, and then and does it concern you, pardon me, that Hamilton has paid this premium for this perpetual pavement intended to give it longevity, so that it's not necessary to do a full restoration on the highway, and yet the highway hasn't been maintained? Doesn't that concern you?
So I think you asked me a couple of things here. One about the perpetual pavement, and then two about the maintenance program.
Yeah, and the fact you've got this $15 million for remediation, and you haven't taken steps to maintain your highway.
So I'm gonna be cautious about the response to maintaining the highway, and I don't, that wasn't my role. We're in the capital program side. And the perpetual pavement, I think from the work done with Golders, identified that the bottom layers were still performing as they needed to, and that the surface course appeared to require a resurfacing.
So you're saying it wasn't your role to concern yourself with the maintenance because that was somebody else's job. Do I have that right?
Correct. I mean, engineering services was the capital delivery side of it, not the operating and maintenance side.
Okay, thank you. Registrar, you can take down that call out.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Roberts. Mr. Commissioner, we've been going for about an hour and a half, and since this is a bit of an impromptu hearing schedule, I just want to keep in mind that we may want to take a break whenever Ms. Roberts thinks it's appropriate, and of course, when you think it's appropriate.
Commissioner, I mean,
Yes. Well, I was going to suggest that we take our break at 10:30.
where are we now? Okay, thank you. Let me, I'll finish this line of questioning and we'll get pretty close to that time, I think, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, forgive me. I'm just getting reorienting myself. Okay, I just want to go through not your concern. Okay, so Registrar, forgive me, I'm gonna ask you to go to the middle of the bottom paragraph. Actually, call it the whole paragraph, please. Again, this section has been ascribed to your voice, Mr. McGuire. I'm going to. Okay, so we've got here. Richard, can you please call out a highlight? And if you can please go to the right side of this page. So you put this rich bottom layer on, rich bottom layer. So they did was cracking something indecipherable. Can you highlight that, please, Registrar? Do you see it?
Sorry, how many lines down is that? I'm not seeing it.
8. It's on the 9th line on the right side. There
Thank
we
you.
go. Thank you. And go down to so that's yes. So it seems odd to me. That's you can go to. Yeah. Okay. So in this conversation with Ms. McNeil, you're describing the pavements, you're noting the rich bottom mix, and you're noting the cracking. And then you identify the riding surface, which is getting top-down cracking. And I think what you're getting here too is that if you don't remediate, you'll have to do a full restoration of the entire highway, and that would be a lot more expensive. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so from a contextual perspective, this is a capture of a conversation that I had. I don't recall it in detail, and I didn't write this out, so it was just sort of some observations and a conversation. But so what you're asking here is if we don't do the surface course, if we'll start having issues occurring in the base, and I believe that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to suggest to you, in fact, that that really does concern you, that if you don't maintain the asset, that you may have to do a complete restoration. That's your worry, isn't it?
So that's the theory I get behind that perpetual pavement. And yes, I mean, you want to protect that. So
Okay,
I would agree with that.
thank you. And take out that call out and that highlight. Thank you, Registrar. Can we please go forward to image 188? Registrar, can you please call out from the bottom half of that page from "and Hamilton is advanced," beginning with "and Hamilton is advanced," and then go call out the rest of it. Thanks. Okay. So here you're recorded as noting that Hamilton's advanced in terms of its asphalt design construction, and that's a lot due to Gary. And then you say, and there's this friction issue with that facility that we haven't dealt with, and I don't know why. See that?
I do.
Okay. And in the back and forth with Ms. McNeil, she asks how quickly could have been dealt with. And you respond, microsurface it. And you note that that could have been done within a year. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So that was your understanding that, in fact, that microsurfacing that was recommended in 2014 could have been done within a year. That's correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay. And then you go on the bottom, say, and you describe microsurfacing in that paragraph. It's like a protective coat. It's an emulsive bonding crushed stone for traction. It's like a driveway sealer. You put it on, and it's tack coat with a different granular with high friction characteristics. See that?
I do.
So you understood at the time that microsurfacing would offer these high frictional characteristics.
Yes, I believe. Yes.
And Ms. McNeil says, and that would have bought us time. And you say, yes, absolutely. That was your response, that it would have, in fact, bought Hamilton time.
Correct.
Okay. And that's time both in terms of the preserved surface of the SMA asphalt, as well as an improved surface friction, wouldn't it?
That's my understanding of microsurfacing, and I'm not sure when, but I believe one of the staff from asset management brought some information forward. I can't remember the name of the contractor either, who had a process that I think that was considered.
Yeah, they did in 2016, and it just didn't get done. So, but the point is here, going back to this discussion, that you're noting, sir, that that if it had been done within a year of the time that recommendation would have been made, that you would have had more time, both with improved surface condition and improved friction. That's correct?
That's my understanding of microsurfacing and what it would have brought as an application. Correct.
Thank you. So, Commissioner Commissioner, have taken us to 10:30. And if we could take our morning break.
Yeah, that's fine. So let's
Thank you.
take a 15-minute break and we'll return at a quarter to 11.
Thank you.
Ms. Roberts?
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, couple more questions. So just the question on some uncertainty on my part. As the manager of geometrics, is that the department that would have kept copies of the Red Hill drawings?
Pardon me.
Sorry, you can take out the call out, registrar. Thank you.
Sorry, you're asking where the repository for all of the engineering records would be?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. So can we just go registrar back to OD 9A to image 190? And Mr. McGuire, this is a continuation of those notes of the conversation. I just want to address one small point. Were you aware that going back to 2013 and then again in 2015 that SEMA had requested drawings for the Red Hill? Was that something that came across your desk?
Sorry, where are you pointing?
I'm not. This is a question, an open question right now.
No, I'm not aware of that. Sorry, they're asking for drawings?
Yes, they'd asked for drawings of the Red Hill.
Okay.
All right. So looking at this page at the very top, actually, Registrar, can you go back to 189 first, just so we can see the beginning of it? Thank you. So at the bottom of 189, you're talking about speed on the Red Hill and some excessive speeding. And then the last sentence on 189 says people seem to be traveling at a very high rate of speed and posted as 90, and it was designed at 90. So so what's going on. So did you just that designed at 90? That I think are you referring to the one turn on the Red Hill that under the current TAC guidance has a design speed of 90 kilometers per hour?
No, I'm not sure. I wouldn't have been referring to one specific part. My understanding was that was the overall design speed. That would be the information I had.
Okay, it's interesting. Okay, thank you, Registrar. I can come out of that call out. Mr. McGuire, I want to go forward to the Bogosian opinion, and I understand your evidence is that you weren't provided a draft of the opinion. I'm going to go to it nonetheless because there are two questions in it I just want to ask of you. Registrar, it's overview document 9A at image 246. So the first is a draft opinion, December 13. I think your evidence is you didn't see that, but at some point you do see the draft. The opinion is largely unchanged into its final draft, except for a couple of things that aren't relevant to the questions I want to ask you. If we could please go forward, Registrar, to a continuation of the summary. Well, let me just go first and I'll frame it. And at paragraph 584, the draft Bogosian opinion references a call with Mr. Malone on December 11, and you can see that beginning at the bottom of the page. And this is encaptured actually in the Bogosian opinion. Registrar, can you please go forward to 248? Thank you. And you can call out 248, beginning with the paragraph SMA has been known. That's about middle of the page. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the discussion about SMA. And then Mr. Malone is quoted as saying, that because of the large aggregates, SMA holds much more water on the road and doesn't drain away. rather than conventional asphalt, because the water sits in pockets between the aggregates, creating micro ponds. And he speculates that that's the reason for high number of accidents. Did anyone come to you and ask you to go back to your subject matter experts on pavement and verify whether in fact this was a characteristic of SMA?
Sorry, this is an exchange between Mr. Bogosian and Mr. Malone. I don't believe I'm on it, and I don't
you're
know. Okay. No, so you're asking, did somebody ask us to go back?
And verify whether in fact that this was a characteristic of SMA as speculated by Mr. Malone.
No, I don't. No one reached out to me if that's what you're asking.
Okay. And then in that sentence, SMA is used in Europe and Southern United States. However, it's largely experimental in Ontario and Canada generally. Did anyone, Mr. Malone, anyone from the legal services ask you to verify whether in fact SMA was largely experimental as is stated here?
No, not to my knowledge.
Thank you. Registrar, you can take out the call out. I want to go forward to one last topic that I think I can address quite quickly. December 14, there's a discussion in which your participant and Ms. Audie has notes. That's at OD 9A, image 254. That's the beginning. And Richard, can you also pull up 255? Oh, geez, that's hard to see, isn't it? Maybe let's just put out 255, and if you can make that all a bit bigger. Thank you. That helps. All right, you were taken to this by Commission Counsel. And there's a statement here halfway through these notes in which it's attributed to you. It says, Gord can't do anything to the surface, did prelim review, tender timing. Do you see that? It's hard to see.
Yep, I do.
Okay, and your testimony on Friday, yeah, you explained that was because in winter there was little you could do. Paving operations were stopped, and there was not much you could do to the surface until warmer weather. And I think you repeated that. And you know, you've identified microsurfacing as a technique that can't be applied without good weather conditions, and I think that I'm not going to have an argument with you on that one. Did you explore whether skid abrading or blast tracking contractors work through wet weather conditions?
So I recall, so I don't believe I've had my meeting yet with Golder's staff. I think that's on the 18th. Is that correct?
It is.
Yeah. And at that point, I believe I get a bit more information on it and ask again for some sort of Ontario, I get Ontario, you use the term references, but I guess that was Ontario clients, I think would be kind of a better
okay, we got
better
it.
summary.
So when you make the statement, there's nothing you can do to the surface. Can't do anything to the surface. At that point, you're just contemplating the treatments you know about, which would be microsurfacing.
Sorry, are these Nicole's notes or are they?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're reading, Nicole's summary of what I said, and my belief at the time was, we were having a conversation about the paving and what may be available to us in the immediate term, and we were still, having that conversation with your team.
Right. So, but my point is that when you had that conversation with Ms. Audie, what you're telling me is that you didn't know that there were other treatments such as blast tracking or skid abrading. Am I understanding you correctly?
And I'm gapping a little bit on timing, but I'm not 100% sure when Kohler sent the brochures and the other documentation. I think it's within a few days.
I think that's right. But amongst the questions you don't seem to ask is as to whether any of them could be used in winter conditions. You don't ask that question, do you?
Where do you, who am I asking that question of?
Dr. Uzarovsky, who's made the recommendation for blast tracking and skid abrading.
Okay, correct. And I believe if I paraphrase this, that I asked them for Ontario clients so we could ask how this process worked.
Okay, that's your evidence. Okay. Thank you for your patience, Mr. McGuire. Those are my questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Ms. McIver, I think, is probably next for the MTO.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. May I proceed?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Mr. McGuire.
Hello.
We heard today a little bit about the discussions between you and MTO personnel, Ms. Lane and Mr. Bentley, in respect of the MTO data, the MTO test results. During those discussions, I take it that they informed you about the purpose of the testing, why it was carried out.
Oh, sorry. Back to the period of the 2008 to 2014.
That's right.
Yeah, correct. Yes, somebody. I can't remember whether it was Mr. Bentley or Ms. Lane or both.
Okay, but you would have been aware that it was carried out in the context of the designated sources materials list to screen the aggregate for its long-term performance. Is that fair?
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay. And also during the discussions, I take it that Miss Lane and Mr. Bentley discussed the actual test results with you and the testing numbers. Is that correct?
So I recall having a conversation with Ms. Lane about testing. Yeah, but I can't recall the direct conversation about the numbers, but I'm sure we had it.
Okay. Were you aware, for instance, that this aggregate was ultimately approved for the MTO DSM list?
Yeah, I do become aware of that.
Okay, and also that it remained on that list throughout all the years of the testing. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I am. I'm aware of it now, and I'm not sure when I got that knowledge, but yes.
Okay, fair enough. And I also take it that neither Ms. Lane nor Mr. Bentley flagged any significant concerns with those friction testing results themselves.
Yeah, I don't recall they raised any significant red flags about what they had observed. Again, it's sort of anecdotal on what I recall with their conversations, but no, they did not.
Right. Okay. I think we've seen in some of the communications, for instance, between MTO and the city's communications personnel, confirmation that the results were within the MTO acceptable range, that they were trending slowly downwards, but that was relatively consistent with normal wear and tear. Do you recall having that discussion with the MTO representatives?
In general, yes. As I noted, they didn't bring up any significant, concern.
Okay. And so I'd like to move on to the extrapolation that CIMA was involved in terms of analyzing the MTO data. we see in some of the communications that you're copied on the very initial communications. It does seem to be Mr. Soldo who is sort of spearheading that process. But did you have input into the decision to engage SEMA for that purpose?
I was aware of it. It wasn't my assignment. So by your phrase input, I would say, I know what's going on, but no, I'm not driving or directing it.
And so you didn't have any conversations with Mr. Soldo about performing that extrapolation or the need to perform it, or what to do with those MTO results?
So kind of a two-phase question there. The MTO results, end sort of definitively in 2014, and the SEMA results extend through, an algorithm or a determination of what the friction values may be. So yeah, I didn't. Sorry, I'm not really answering your question, but maybe you can come back at it again.
Sure. My question was whether you and Mr. Soldo discussed what to do with the MTO results such that SEMA was going to be requested to do the extrapolation. Were there any discussions prior to engaging SEMA with Mr. Soldo?
So if I get the timeframes correct, we are in front of council in early February. Then we're made aware from MTO mid-February. Is that correct?
That's correct, February 12th.
Yeah, and so I think the assignment from that perspective was to determine, like, what does the trend line look like, and what are we, what's the materials status or calculated status at that time.
Okay, and did you ever consider requesting MTO's assistance in terms of conducting that analysis of its own data? I ask because I'm
fair.
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I'm asking just because, there were these communications, there was some assistance back and forth going on, and it doesn't seem that MTO was asked about perhaps carrying out this extrapolation.
Okay, and I don't have any insight into that.
Okay. And so then, to your knowledge, you wouldn't, I assume, have insight into whether MTO was asked for their views on the methodology of performing such an extrapolation. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, and did you ultimately see a copy of the findings that were compiled by SEMA? It was issued at the end of February, I believe.
Yeah, I believe there was a late February, early March, either letter or memo from SEMA.
Okay, and were you aware that SEMA ultimately recommended in-field friction testing?
Yes, I believe I am aware of that. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I think by this time we're having a conversation about pre and post resurfacing friction testing. So I'm not sure if it arose from SEMA or if it was, an internal conversation that was still captured by SEMA, but yes.
Okay, and you would have been aware that MTO offered to perform follow-up friction testing on the Red Hill. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct. I believe in a conversation with Ms. Lane, she noted that MTO had one or two trailers, was potentially getting another newer model or newer one, and may have availability. That's what I recall.
Okay, but you didn't take them up on that offer ultimately, correct?
Ultimately, no. I don't know. I believe the testing was done by a different company.
Okay. But at this point, at the end of February 2019, would it be fair to say that there'd been no decision to conduct testing after the winter months? No one had been retained at that point. That's sort of later on in May. Is that accurate?
I think that's correct. I don't think we've retained anybody to friction test at that point.
Okay, and you hadn't gotten back to MTO to say definitively, no, we don't need your assistance in this regard.
I don't believe we did, no.
Okay, and Mr. McGuire, I'm just going to move on to the overlay, and perhaps Registrar, if we could pull up overview document 10A at 111, please. And I believe actually, Registrar, we're looking for page 112. Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. McGuire, I see here at paragraph 280, this is March 1st, 2019. You asked to call Ms. Lane for a bit of clarity. And this is, as you can see at the very top of page 112, I'm looking to overlay our independent results directly with the MTO results. So far, the numbers appear to line up, but some assumptions have been made about the start points. Do you recall having a discussion with Ms. Lane? I don't believe we really hashed through this piece in your testimony yet.
So I believe I did have a conversation with Ms. Lane. I thought it was later on in April, but maybe, maybe it was earlier.
Okay. What do you recall about a conversation with Ms. Lane in the context of this overlay analysis?
I think she answered my question fairly quickly. I thought we were looking for the positional information here, the latitude, longitude, or that was the, I think that was the discussion we were looking at.
Okay. You mentioned earlier today that at some point you learned that correlating the British pendulum test friction values with the grip tester values, with the ASTM truck values, weren't necessarily able to be correlated with each other. Do you recall any discussion about correlation with Ms. Lane?
I recall having a conversation with her, and she's she's been engaged in this industry for a long period of time. I think I'm finding out from Golders later in February that there's challenges in correlating the different methodologies. So I'm not sure. Sorry, you hear if I had that conversation directly with Ms. Lane, or if it was something that was still sort of arising.
Okay, fair enough. But your evidence is that it likely happened sometime later in February, but you can't pinpoint the specific conversation. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's reasonable. Correct.
Okay. Registrar, if we could please pull up HAM 54844. Okay. And so this is the communication in and around February 27th, February 28th. Mr. McKinnon suggests that the MTO results are somewhat akin to the trade wind friction results. You've told us that you were just thinking about numbers, just focused on numbers, and for that reason, your response was correct. The trade wind results are quite close to the MTO results. And then Mr. Soldo said he would concur. But you've also told us that you subsequently, or in and around this time, found out that it's not an apples to apples comparison. You've mentioned a lot that you're aware that it was the UK kind of testing that occurred in the trade wind. By this time, you've had conversations with MTO about the MTO results. Why didn't you follow back up with Mr. McKinnon, or did you follow up with Mr. McKinnon to let him know?
And I'm not sure that I've got a direct recollection, but I do remember that we were trying to understand after a few of these instances about whether or not the numbers did actually line up. So I don't think I followed up with an email, but I believe we had some conversations around how the testing and the protocols as we got further out with the Golders study, which I think comes up shortly, it indicates that there isn't an easy correlation. So I'm not sure if it came up in the conversation with the Golders numbers, or if it was just something we may have had a conversation. But it was one of the factors that continued to arise around testing and evaluation.
Right. Okay. So, but fair to say then you don't have a recollection of specifically ensuring this information was passed on to City Council to correct, if you will, the initial information that was provided to them.
So this wasn't provided to City Council, was it, or is it went to?
It was provided to, sorry, Registrar, if we could go to the third page of this email, that would be helpful. So you'll see here that it was provided in response to an inquiry from Councillor Marula. And then Mr. McKinnon responds to Councillor Marula. And then the following part of the chain says, Sam appears to want this as part of a communication strategy. Can you tell me if you have concerns with this? Then there's discussion about, well, who said, the test results were consistent? Was this MTO or someone else? And then ultimately, there's a decision that, well, Sam already used the email, but in any event, do you two, that this is directed to you and Mr. Soldo, do you two agree with my last statement that the MTO results generally agree with Tradewind? And so my question for you is, and perhaps you didn't notice or recall, but there were no steps taken to correct this information that was passed on to Councillor Marula.
So post resurfacing, we do friction testing, and we retain SEMA, and we supply a fairly detailed summary, and I believe it's in 2020, which outlines the differential methods and the ability to rely on testing methodologies and their responses, but not immediately. We hadn't to come back to this.
Okay. Registrar, could we please pull up OD 10A again? And this should be at page 187. Okay. 187. Sorry, it's not at 187. It's at paragraph 574. I don't have the page number handy, but if we could just scroll forward a bit, that would be helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Perfect. Thank you, Registrar. So you'll see here at paragraph 574, there is reference to this request for apology that was directed to the province of Ontario. I assume that you became aware of this request for apology at some point. Do you recall when that was?
No, I don't.
Okay, would it have been shortly after it was issued? Which was, I believe, March 20th, 2019?
So if you're asking my involvement in either the council or mayor's conversations with the MTO, I had none. So
Right, no, I'm simply asking when you became aware that this request for an apology had been issued.
probably around the time that it was being issued.
Okay. Okay, Registrar, could you pull out the last main paragraph on page 219, please? Yes, perfect. Okay, so here we see that the basis of the request for an apology is respecting the MTO's friction testing results, which concurred with the results of the City of Hamilton report, meaning the Tradewind report, during the same period of time. And in doing so, in terms of not disclosing at the time, compounded the betrayal to City Council. Do you recall seeing that statement? Essentially that the MTO results aligned with the Tradewind results?
No, I don't recall that.
Okay. All right, I'll just take you to one last piece. Registrar, I believe that this is at page 187 of this overview document. Yes, thank you. Okay, so at paragraph 483 here, we see it's now March 29th, so 9 days after this request for an apology was issued. At MTO's direction, Mr. Bentley and Ms. Lane are reaching out to coordinate a meeting about MTO doing friction testing for the city. And the meeting is ultimately set for April 2nd, 2019, but doesn't go forward. Do you recall why the meeting did not go forward?
No, I don't. In my recollection, I did have a conversation with Ms. Lane, but I thought it was early April, but I'm not sure what happened here.
Okay, but by this time, had you informed the MTO definitively that you were not interested in their offer to friction test?
I don't believe, no, I don't believe we have.
Okay, and do you recall why communications with MTO stopped around this point?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGuire. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McCarter. Then it's over to Ms. Contractor on behalf of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Good morning, Mr. McGuire. I have a few questions for you following the evidence you've provided over the last few days. I'm going to start with the issue of continuous lighting on the Red Hill. Mr. Registrar, could you please go to HAM 702? And while he's pulling that up, Mr. McGuire, you'll recall that Commission Counsel asked you about a report to Council that was penned by yourself and Mr. Field and authorized by Mr. McGuire with respect to lighting on the Red Hill around September 2016. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And your evidence was that prior to preparing that report to Council, you would have reviewed at some point at least the illumination references in the 2015 SEMA report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you weren't actually taken to that report. So this is what that report is. And if we go to image 38, this is the section entitled Illumination Review. Is this the section that you would have reviewed prior to the September 2016 report?
I would have reviewed this section, and I believe there's also kind of a summary or action section further on.
That's right. And Commission Counsel asked you about your understanding of the limitations around continuous illumination on the Red Hill. And your evidence was that your understanding was that lighting had been considered in the origins of the Red Hill project and that it wasn't included in the overall project, and you were not sure if it was specifically excluded or just not included. But either way, after the EA, there was decision point lighting. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you were not sure if continuous illumination was prohibited by the EA or just not included. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. My understanding of the sort of the totality of the review of the Red Hill included a lot of stakeholder engagement, which considered a number of environmental factors. Lighting was one of them. And I wasn't involved in the project at the very beginning stages, but my understanding is that it was considered, but only decision point lighting was delivered.
Okay. And did you have an understanding as to whether a new EA would be required depending on whether continuous illumination was prohibited or just not included?
My understanding is and was at the time that the environmental assessment process would require a new EA for continuous lighting.
So
at this moment in time.
Right. But did you have a sense of whether that turned on if continuous illumination was prohibited or just not included, or that it would be required regardless?
I think it was required regardless.
Okay. And Mr. Registrar, if you could please pull out the second paragraph in that section. So this section of the SEMA report provides a bit of a historical background on the limitations of continuous illumination. And you'll see that it says, it should be noted that design choices that were made during the design phase were intimately linked to approvals. And reference materials note that the sole reason for making design choices was to reduce environmental impacts. And then goes on to say, because of this unique area and because of the costs associated with building a roadway on the escarpment, the city identified several design refinements that included restricting illumination to intersections and on and off ramps. And was your understanding regarding continuous illumination that we just talked about consistent with this paragraph?
Yes.
Did you understand this paragraph to mean that the EA prohibited lighting?
No.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Registrar, you can pull that down. Mr. McGuire, the 2013 SEMA report has very similar or identical language to the 2015 report on the design choices around continuous illumination. I'm not going to take you to it in the interest of time, but do you recall whether you would have reviewed the 2013 SEMA report, or at least the portions related to illumination prior to September 2016?
My recollection is I was aware of it, but if I remember correctly, the 2013 SEMA report was a fairly limited geographic scope. It wasn't the entire Red Hill. It was, I believe, just the south end or and the ramp or the ramps. That's what I recall.
Okay. So not sure either way whether you would have looked at it?
Not definitely.
Okay. Mr. Registrar, could we please go to HAM 58680?
Sorry, before we leave this,
Yeah.
is there not a recommendation section?
There is a table at the end. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I thought there was a section that referred to, a bit more of a summary on this. And I think it also contain costs or something like that.
Sure. I think that's at image 57, I think. Yeah. And if you go to the bottom of that, Mr. Registrar, you'll see it says install continuous illumination.
In the summary part. Yeah. And
it says under comment, it says requires sound evaluation in the context of the surrounding network and environment, and environmental assessment will be required. Is that what you're referring to?
yeah, there's a couple of things here. I thought maybe in a previous page or two that there was a bit more of a summary that spoke directly into illumination. Am I misremembering here?
No, so the page before that, on page 56, there's a section that says install continuous illumination. Is that what you're referring to? Perhaps
I think
Mr.
so,
Registrar?
correct.
Okay, did you want to go to that?
Sure, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So a couple of things here, and one of the things that I do kind of recall about this report is continuous illumination along the Red Hill for $800,000 is a very low number. I think that number jumps to 12 to 18 in the follow-up study. I think it's 3 years later, and that's million. So assuming the Red Hill is half of that, and you take the low number, that's around $6 million. So that number was surprising. I think this report also found it to be sort of a higher proportion of non-daylight collisions. And then the other thing that I do note is that they say in this install continuous illumination, I think the second or third sentence from the bottom, it says it doesn't appear to be the most adequate solution for the Red Hill. So that's probably where we should have referred to in the 2016 study. And I apologize at trying to stitch all this stuff together.
That's fine. I think you're actually heading to a direction that I wanted to take you to. So if we can pull that call down or close that call down, Mr. Registrar, but keep that page up and also pull out HAM 58680 to image 3, or the last page of that. Okay, and if we pull out the last paragraph, it says the consultant review included a high-level discussion related to lighting. The high-level review is not comprehensive enough to guide any staff recommendations, and in order to fully understand the benefits, risks, and challenges of adding continuous lighting. Is that what you're referring to when you're reviewing the 2015 SEMA report with respect to illumination?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. We can pull that call out down and close out of the SEMA report, the document on the left, Mr. Registrar, and go to the start of this report on page 1. Okay, can you please pull out the first 2 paragraphs, the section entitled Council Direction? I'm sorry, actually, can you pull out the first two paragraphs under information? Okay. So, Mr. McGuire, here, the report, the second paragraph really talks about the original environmental assessments, which were completed for the link in the Red Hill, which included a review of lighting. And it states it was identified that through the Red Hill Creek Valley that lighting would have a detrimental environmental impact and lighting restrictions were imposed. Decisions regarding adding lighting on the link or Red Hill would require renewing and updating the original EA so the impacts of lighting could be re-examined. Is the information that you're providing here consistent with what we just talked about being your understanding of the limitations around continuous illuminations and the section of the 2015 SEMA report that we looked at?
Yeah, that's correct.
In these paragraphs, are you advising council that the EA prohibited continuous illumination on the Red Hill?
So no, I think what we're trying to portray here is that I'm cautious around, the word environmental assessment, and maybe it would have been better off to say, project assessments. But what we're trying to identify is that adding lighting will require updating the environmental assessments in the area, and so that we can understand it, because there was obviously a lot of conversation around the environmental impact.
Thank you. And Mr. Registrar, if we could now call up the council direction section that you had up previously. Okay. So this is the direction that council provided to staff, which led to this information report. And you'll see here, it references the December 7th, 2015 PWC committee, during which the 2015 SEMA report that we were just looking at was presented. And at that meeting, the direction was for staff to report to the committee with information on the costs and process of investigating an improved lighting system on the Red Hill and Link. And so here, the council direction is for information from staff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And they're asking for information on how much it would cost to investigate improved lighting.
Correct.
And also for information on the process around investigating improved lighting.
Correct.
Did you understand council to be asking for a recommendation?
No.
We go to the last paragraph of the document. So the second page, please, Mr. Registrar. Or the last page of the document. Thank you. So we looked at this just before. It states that a more fulsome consultant report would be needed as the high-level discussion related to lighting was not comprehensive enough, and estimates that the study would be $100,000 approximately. Again, Ms. Lawrence spent some time asking why staff did not make a recommendation to proceed with the more fulsome consultant report. And again, Mr. McGuire, what did you understand council's direction was here for this report?
So council, in sort of paraphrasing, was looking to understand what the sort of cycle time and process would be to investigate continuous lighting on the facility. My understanding was council was not asking us for a recommendation on whether it was or wasn't an item that we would consider and to budget it. So that's what I took from it.
Okay. Okay, we can call that down. Commission counsel spent some time asking you about your response to SEMA's finding as in the illumination report. And I just want to ask you a few follow-up questions about that. So first she asked if you recalled becoming aware from SEMA that the former EA or the EA documentation did not include any preclusion of continuous illumination. And again, your evidence on this was that your understanding of the Red Hill project and back to the original design and design reviews was that lighting was considered, and that you were not sure if there was a separate report or part of a larger design review, and that the decision was made to do lighting in the form that it was installed, and that that's what was brought forward in the project. And you referred back to the evidence you gave the previous day about not being sure if it was prohibited or not included. Ms. Lawrence asked if your understanding about continuous illumination was different after SEMA completed its review of the historical EA documentation. And again, your evidence was that you understood that there was sensitivity to environmental factors and a variety of other things that the EA or previous document had considered, and that the SEMA report was advising that whatever took place prior did not prohibit lighting in the valley. And again, as we've previously discussed, your understanding was that the EA you weren't sure whether the EA prohibited or was not included in the EA. Either way, your understanding was that a new environmental assessment would be required going forward. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so was the information that SEMA was providing in its draft illumination report that the EA did not prohibit continuous illumination, was that inconsistent with your initial understanding?
No, again, we're probably mixing up the project studies, because I know there was a lot of them in what ended up in the final Red Hill Valley EA. But no, I understood that lighting had been considered, as a variety of other things had been considered to the project, and then certain aspects were delivered. But yeah, probably just paraphrasing there. But yeah, that's what I understood.
Thank you. Commission counsel then asked you about a meeting that you had with Mr. McKinnon on June 11th, 2018, after receiving a draft of the, or after a progress meeting with SEMA on the illumination project. And the calendar invite for that meeting was Link Red Hill Lighting. And Commission counsel suggested that at that meeting, you provided Mr. McKinnon with an update because the EA historical review actually did represent a change from what the city had previously conveyed in past reports about the EA. Now she didn't identify which reports she was referring to or take you to any of them. So I just want to make sure your evidence on this point is clear. So forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but did you understand that the 2015 SEMA reports stated that continuous illumination was prohibited?
No, that wasn't my understanding. Again, my understanding of the lighting was considered not executed and would require, follow-up studies and assessments.
Okay. And as we discussed earlier, your understanding of the September 2016 report to council also did not state that continuous illumination was prohibited.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on now to the fall of 2018 period. Mr. Registrar, if you could please go to CIM 16870. Okay, this is Mr. Malone's email to you on September 4th, replying to your email from August 30th, during which you sent him the friction testing results that you found. And could we pull out the first paragraph, please, Mr. Registrar? Okay, so Mr. Malone says, Gord, this appears to be the test results from 2007 that were done by MTO at the time the Red Hill was being finished pre-opening. Gary Moore had provided these to me in August of 2015 before we completed the 2 safety reports in 2015. Ultimately, they failed to offer any ability to quantify any friction problem that may be a source of the collision performance. Commission counsel asked you whether you considered sharing Mr. Malone's email with anyone at the city. And your evidence was that you didn't share the info with anyone else at the city because it appeared to be information the city already had and was now 11 years old. And your assumption was that he folded that into the work that he's done. What was that assumption based on?
His statement that he'd already been provided these results, and he unfortunately, he says they failed to quantify, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks to me like he's received them and done some processing with them.
And received them prior to the 2 safety reports in 2015, correct?
Yeah, correct.
We can call that down or close that call out, Mr. Registrar. Okay. And you'll recall, Mr. McGuire, that in your initial email to Mr. Malone on August 30th, to which this email is in response to, you stated this is a study of the Red Hill prior to opening, and your evidence was that it doesn't look like you reviewed the email in its entirety, and you didn't note that there were friction testing results from 2013. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it looks like Mr. Malone missed that as well. Ms. Roberts, in her examination, asked you whether when you received this email from Mr. Malone and you understood that there was uncertainty about the threshold and what the data meant, why didn't you direct Mr. Malone to go back to Tradewind, to go back to the consultant who did these numbers? As of September 4th, were you aware of the Tradewind report?
No, and sort of back to the exchange with Brian, it appears that I did it at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and when I sent it out, so I don't appear to have read it, and I flipped in some information, and when you responded back, no, I did not.
Okay, and at this point, thank you. At this point, were you aware that of a company called Tradewind and them doing friction testing in 2013 at this point?
No, not to my knowledge.
Thank you. And Mr. Registrar, could you please go to GOL 2981, please? And to image 8. Mr. McGuire, this is the draft Golder report. Sorry, image 8 and 9, is that? Thank you. Oh, excuse me, I think I have my references wrong. It's 10 and 11. So I'm not going to take you through this. Ms. Roberts took you through the recommendations, specifically with respect to the Red Hill on the second page there about microsurfacing, as well as replacing the SMA, the milling of the SMA for about 2.5 kilometers. So the recommendation here is that, again, the SMA be replaced with a new surface course mix at select locations, and on the remaining portion of the Red Hill, that it be microsurfaced. Did you understand at this point that microsurfacing, and when I say at this point, I mean when you reviewed this report at some point in the fall of 2018, that microsurfacing included essentially changing the existing surface of the road by placing a coat of asphalt with certain properties?
Sorry, and if you're asking about what my knowledge of microsurfacing was, that evolved, I believe, across the fall of 2018. But yes, I do understand what they were trying to do with it.
Okay. Did you understand the recommendation is to essentially replace or materially alter the surface of the Red Hill, of the entire surface of the Red Hill? Is that fair?
I'm just rereading this.
Sure. We can call out on the second page the paragraph starting with "in order to," if that would be useful. And the other paragraphs as well. That whole section. Thank you.
And applying microservice. So Susan picks up on the polished stone value in the surface course mix, which I'm reading this to apply to the 2.5 kilometers where they're suggesting a mill and overlay.
Right.
And then there appears to be a recommendation for a single layer of microsurfacing.
Right. And so my question is, when you reviewed this report, so I know initially Ms. Jacobs provided you with a summary, and that's what you put in your briefing memo. But when you ultimately reviewed this report, did you understand that the recommendation here essentially would lead to either replacing or materially altering the surface of the Red Hill? Is that fair?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Commission counsel asked whether you considered implementing Golder's recommendation once you learned and reviewed the report as an interim measure prior to resurfacing. And your evidence was that the trade report conclusion was to do further investigation and possible remedial measures, and that the resurfacing was a significant remedial activity. What did you mean by significant there?
Well, so in context, I mean, looking at we've got a 4-year-old report here. I think at this time, I'm not. Yeah, I think this is still late September. I'm not certain of the activities that have taken place. I know that Tradewinds identified further testing and potential remedial action. So by remediating the entire surface of the facility, that's a significant activity. I mean, it's the most, it's the largest activity that could take place, with the exception of it. We had a conversation with Golders about getting down into the base. So it's a significant, use the term intervention, but or activity.
Okay. Would applying Golder's recommendation here, which again, what was to replace or materially alter the surface of the Red Hill prior to the resurfacing as an interim measure, be economically or logistically feasible?
Yeah, I still, and I don't know if I have the economics, but from a logistics perspective, I think by the time I learn about this, we're into, the October, November timeframe. My recollection of the record is that in exchange with Golders, it's identified that, we need good weather. Good generally refers to some minimum temperature threshold so that these activities can take place on the facility. So yeah, I don't think from a logistical perspective, given where we were in time, that looking at some of these was feasible.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Registrar, can you please go to HAM 1073? So this document that the registrar is going to pull up, Mr. McGuire, is the proposal from Golder from 2017, which you learn about sometime in November 2018. And if we could please pull out the first paragraph of that on the first page. And you'll see here in the project description, it says, as part of this assignment, Golder will also provide recommendations for methods to improve the skid resistance if such improvement is required, and the project proposal details our scope of work for this assignment. What did you take from reviewing this proposal?
Sorry, may I just intercede at this point? This document is the one that's signed, but there is an exchange of drafts that updates this paragraph and isn't reflected in the signed version.
So I understand that, but I believe the version that Mr. McGuire looks at is this version.
Okay, forgive me. Thank you.
So first, maybe I can provide a little clarity on the versioning. I don't think I've ever, I mean, to my knowledge, I haven't seen the other version, or I hadn't seen it. The sort of the genesis of seeing this proposal was in response to the Freedom of Information request, and so I read it, and obviously I'm alive to the questions around material properties on the Red Hill, and I see that Golders has another assignment, and in that assignment they will determine skid resistance methodologies if such improvement is required. So, yes, correct.
And what did that tell you about, at least based on this proposal, about whether Golder had concerns about the skid resistance, or had formed any conclusions about the need for improvements to the skid resistance on the Red Hill? So
what I'm reading from this is that they haven't, I mean, they're going to determine if there is a skid resistance concern or issue. And if such determinations made, then they'll provide recommendations.
Okay. Perhaps if we can keep that page up, Mr. Registrar, and go to HAM 62030. So you'll recognize this, Mr. McGuire. It's the document that you prepared, trying to keep track of all the various things that were going on at the time. And if we go to image 9 and pull out lines 130 to 136. So here you say, recently, and because of the FOI activity, we have uncovered a 2017 assignment to Golder and Associates that was to determine, investigate the skid resistance of the existing pavement surface of the Red Hill, and provide recommendations to improve the skid resistance if such improvement is required. This statement seems at odds with the statement made by Golders in 2014 that there was relatively low friction and that the city should address it through a micro surfacing program. What inconsistency were you referring to here?
So, I mean, we just reviewed the, I guess, the opening part of the proposal. And the proposal says, if there's an issue, we will find a solution for it. But the 2014 report indicates that there's a relatively low friction number, and we should do something. If I'm paraphrasing that report. So I guess I'm not sure if something's happened in the interim between 2014 and 2017, and it feels inconsistent between the two reports.
Thank you. If we could please, Mr. Registrar, go to OD9A, image 299. And also HAM 54182. Okay, so we moved forward a little bit. Commission Counsel took you through the back and forth with Dr. Uzarowski, following your meeting with him in December of 2018. You'll see at paragraph 694, you send him an email on January 13th. And if we could go to the next page, please. And pull out the entire top excerpt of the email. So I'm not going to take you through the full chain because we spent some time on that, but you note here in your response below in point 3, you indicate that the concern about skid potential on the Red Hill is still valid and the city should consider how to address this. However, in the draft report on the bottom of page 2, you wrote, as discussed with the city, if there is a concern with the frictional characteristics of the SMA surface course on the Red Hill, can you please provide clarity on these statements? And if we can go to that section, which is in the other document, Mr. Registrar, that you pulled up at page 2. So you go under analysis and interpretation right at the bottom of that, as discussed with the city. Right at the bottom of that section, you'll see, as discussed with the city. Right, thank you. Okay, so first you see the proposal from 2017, which says if there is a concern with skid resistance, we'll make recommendations. Now you get a draft copy of the report and it says, again, as discussed with the city, if there is a concern with frictional characteristics of the SMA surface course on the Red Hill, an immediate and effective solution would be to carry out shot blasting and skid abrading. And as we saw in your email moments ago, you're asking for clarity from Dr. Yuzurowski to reconcile those statements. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I believe this is in December now,
Yeah.
so December 17th. Is this the, sorry.
So this is the draft you get in December 17th. You exchange an email with him, he responds, and then you send another response on January 13th, which is what we were just looking at.
Okay. So but again, for clarity, is this the report that he brings to our meeting? I think it was on December 18th.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, correct. Yeah, again, I mean, in the meeting, and I'm not sure if we're jumping around a bit here, but he identified that there was concerns with the friction, but in the report, he's saying if there is a concern, and so I'm looking for a definitive go forward statement here.
Right. And if we go to GOL 6612, so this is the final version that you receive from Golder. And if we go to image 3, section underneath the table, pull that out, please. So based on your request for clarification in that January 13th email, Golder makes edits to the report, and this is the revised version. And it says, as was brought to the city's attention a number of times previously, an immediate effective treatment to address a concern with frictional characteristics of the SMA surface would be to carry out shot blasting and skid abrading. Did you get the clarity you were looking for in the final version of the report?
Maybe, and maybe we can close this call out for a second. And this, I would characterize that as a recommendation. But if you go back a page, that appears to be captured in a section called analysis and interpretation. So I'm not sure what to do with this, because it's not a conclusion or a recommendation. It appears to be an analysis and an interpretation. And let me just express a little bit of frustration here in that there was a lengthy exchange with Golders trying to put frameworks and goalposts around some of their measurements. I ended up with, some results, but if we go to the next page, I get a table from TAC that represents a skid number, but I don't know how that correlates to any of the numbers that are being presented to me. I do learn that the grip number, skid number, and British pendulum values don't correlate. So I was yes, I got this report, and no, it didn't provide me any further insight into what, if any, concerns were being brought forward.
And what would you have expected Golder to do if they had concerns about the skid potential on the Red Hill?
Well, I think really what I'm looking for and going through, and I think you know, we continue this with SEMA, and we continue with a few other groups, is yes, we're getting measurements, and yes, we have we're aware of the fact that there's a concern, but no, we don't have. I don't have a framework to fit it into, and if there was a framework by which this material or wasn't performing as referenced with this approved standard or this approved guide or something, then that's what I would expect. And I'm not seeing it here. And apologies, I'm a little. It's been a little while since I've been through this, but there was a lot going on in this report. But I mean, you know, if I look at that one comment about measured texture depth, it says it's generally considered good. I asked for frameworks around that, but I don't, you know, it doesn't seem to be easy to put your arms around it.
Thank you.
So apologies.
No, that's fine. If we can go to OD9A, image 188 and 189. Ms. Roberts took you to some of the excerpts from the recording of your discussion with Ms. McNeil and Ms. Cameron. And on page 88, you make some comments about saying microsurfacing could have been done in a year. And she asked you a couple of questions about that. You'll see at the top of 189, you go on to say, microsurfacing, is what you're referring to, could arguably be throwing away money, but it would increase the frictional characteristics of this asset. Why did you think that it could arguably be throwing away money?
I'm not certain when I'm aware, but I know that we've had a contractor come in with a proposal. And one of the things that I don't know is the durability of microsurfacing and whether it would have withstood, you know, the truck traffic or, you know, length or significant volumes are on the Red Hill. So I wasn't aware of the application of it on that sort of facility and whether or not it would persist.
Okay. We can close that call out, Mr. Registrar. I want to ask you, Mr. McGuire, just a few general questions about your role in engineering services and the department generally compared to traffic and Mr. Solar's role. Generally speaking, is it fair to say that traffic dealt with the road safety side of things and engineering dealt with the durability of the roadway?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And your background, Mr. McGuire, is in geomatics, correct?
Correct.
You don't have a background in traffic engineering safety?
Correct.
By October 2018, and specifically after Mr. McKinnon and Mr. Soldo were aware of the Traven report, what was your understanding of Mr. Solder's role in assessing the Traven report and roadway safety?
So my understanding was that we were running sort of parallel streams in that he was working with SEMA on the roadside safety audit, which would provide a lot of insight or a lot of inputs into the resurfacing of the capital project. But he would lead and did lead any and all of the conversations around, you know, the countermeasures, immediate countermeasures, and anything else that was required to address the facility from an operations perspective.
And when you say operational perspective, what do you mean specifically?
Daily operations as opposed to sort of program capital.
Understood. And thank you, Mr. McGuire. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. Do you have any follow-up questions?
I do, and I'd seek Commissioner to have a brief indulgence to take 5 minutes before I proceed with them. I think it might be useful to have that time just to narrow the questions to make this as efficient as possible.
Okay, why don't we do that? Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10 past 12. Ms. Lawrence.
Commissioner, I have no questions in reply.
Okay. Well, in that event, Mr. McGuire, thank you very much for attending the inquiry. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that you're now excused.
Thank you, and
On with your life.
I am pleased to know that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, take care.
And the rest of us will stand adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you. Have a good evening. Good afternoon.